So, tonight, we're in session 2, and we're talking, last time we talked about why. Why did God create? Can anybody, well, I'll just tell you, it's almost not fair to ask you questions about something maybe you just learned with the first time, unless you just have something that you'd like to share. You know, last time we talked about, well, why did God create? And it really comes down, and I found this to be so often the case when you're studying theology, that you end up not necessarily getting the answer, but changing the question. That happens a lot. So before you can even answer that question, why did God create? 2 questions you need to ask as well as, well, who is God and what is the end product of man? So what qualities of God would you say had to do with his creation of man?
His creativity.
His creativity! Yeah. Right on. Yeah, he's a creative God, and he made us in his image. We are creative beings as well. Of course, a different kind of creativeness. Good. What would be another one? His complexity. So he is complex in one sense. He's also what? He's also simple. Not made of parts like you and I are. Yeah, good. What else?
Explain that.
Yeah, okay.
I've never heard you say that.
You've never heard of the doctrine of simplicity about God? So if you look at a person, they have a brain and lungs and kidneys, and they've got arms and legs, but God is not made up of parts. We are made up of, so we've got organs, and you break down the organs, we've got molecules, you break down the molecules, we've got atoms, and then you break down the atoms into smaller parts, and maybe someday there's even smaller subatomic particles than the ones we know of right now, but you can't break down God. He simply is. He simply, you know, when somebody said, "Who are you?" what did he say? He said, I am. I am, and he does not need parts like you and I do. So that's been around the church for millennia. And
so biologically, he's a single-cell organism.
I don't even know if you could say he's single-cell. I'd say he's a no-celled spirit. Yeah. Yeah. Noodle on that one. Noodle on that one for a little while. I got to change this real quick. Good. So, and then what about man? Why did he create man? What would you say is our chief, perhaps one of our chief ends, as we saw in the Westminster Catechism? What are we here to do?
Glorify God.
Glorify God and worship him and enjoy him. Yeah, enjoy him forever. So God is a benevolent God. Even when you look at creation, when you look at the Garden of Eden, when God was making fruit on trees and all that, was he in need of food? No. Nope. He was perfectly happy to create and give those things to us. And we could enjoy him, enjoy what he made. Okay. I need to get to a different view here. Okay, so I want to start off tonight. The material, actually, the next couple of weeks, it's a little bit shorter. So I want to show you something that came up, and let me be clear at first. This is not an endorsement in any case for Joe Rogan. He's got a podcast that's wildly popular. However, the man he's got some horrible language he uses. But he just had on the guy, have you heard of the Babylon Bee? Yeah, it's a satirical Christian website that sort of makes fun of the church in a good way. These are believers that run the Babylon Bee. It's really funny, it's satirical. But they've been censored on a lot of social media platforms. And Joe Rogan had the CEO of the Babylon Bee, which to my knowledge is a believer. And he's pro-life. And and Joe Rogan is far from a Christian, although if he continues to seek truth the way that I think he is, you can't help but to start brushing up against Christianity. It's just going to happen. And even if you've watched the journey of Jordan Peterson, I don't know that he's a believer, but he's really, really close. I think he's very, very close. So let me just show you. And what I want to show you is just how relevant what we're talking about is in modern day discussions, especially on the subject of abortion. They're going to have a conversation. So one guy is a Christian, one guy is definitely not a Christian, is even opposed to it. Listen to this discussion they have.
You don't have the right to tell my 14-year-old daughter she has to carry her rapist baby. You understand
to
that?
look that woman in the eye who was the one
Listen,
of the
do you
rape.
understand that? That's a 14-year-old child. And if you have a 14-year-old child...
Can you hear that okay?
No.
Is that Joe Rogan right there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's rape. You say that they have to carry that baby?
I don't think two wrongs make a right. I don't think
That's
murder.
not- I don't think that's
murder is
wrong.
an answer to. I don't think murder fixes a rape.
What if we're talking about an abortion when the fetus, literally it's like 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 days? What if she just turned positive, just now, positive for pregnancy?
I just disagree that.
What
you
if it
can-
just happened
that you can
today?
like draw a line on when
You can't,
once
so
life
you
is
can't
begun.
do,
I don't
at
think
the
you draw
very
lines.
moment.
I would lay it out like this. I would say, it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human life. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human life. Therefore, abortion is wrong. And I don't think any of the examples of like, oh well, how developed is it? You know, can it think? Is it conscious? Can it dream? Can it feel pain?
So for you, it's the moment of
I think
conception.
that if it's a human life, a distinct human life, then I think it's wrong to end its life. And
So you think that
do you
think that once the conception happens, there's some sort of a miraculous event? Like at the very moment, like you could literally get to the point where the sperm cracks the egg. If you could scoop that egg out right there, would that be abortion?
Well, I mean, at some point you're going to have to say there was a magic moment that happened because you believe that we eventually become valuable humans, right?
Well, listen,
Where's the moment where you think the magic happened? When we start talking about harmful misinformation and the types of things that are considered, like that I say or that we tweet or the jokes that we make that are considered harmful misinformation. I'm like, well, what about calling that baby a clump of cells? I think that's harmful misinformation because then you're encouraging people to kill it like it's nothing when it's actually a human life. It's a developing human life. I think abortion is healthcare, the way that rape is lovemaking. If we want to use rape as I think they're opposites, and it's like these are euphemisms that we use. You know, we use the word healthcare. We're talking about a procedure that ends an innocent human life, and we're calling it healthcare. That's like calling rape lovemaking.
And this is why it's such a human issue, because I see what you're saying. Life is valuable. Like, yes, people almost were the victims of abortion, and they weren't. They went on to become these amazing people, and we would have lost them.
Sometimes it's a failed abortion. Like there's people who've survived like a saline abortion, and they're damaged as a result of it, but they lived, and now they're born. They usually go on, ironically enough, to become pro-life activists.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's wild. But it makes sense. I mean, that's a major.
Yeah.
Would you be a pro-life activist?
Probably would be.
So, again, Joe Rogan, by no means a believer, but he gets to a point, I don't think, they didn't talk about the magic moment there, did they?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
When he said, when do you think the magic is?
Yeah. So, if you're going to say, and this is what's where Joe Rogan got stuck, if you're going to say that human life has dignity, in other words, if someone were to come along to his same daughter and murder her, of course he'd have a real problem. Any sane person would have a problem. The question is, when and why does a human life have dignity? Now that's where I would challenge Joe Rogan to answer that question. Is it at 1 minute old, 5 minutes old, 5 minutes before they're born? When are you going to draw that line? Now, we'll talk about that. We're not going to get totally into that tonight. But when is the soul created? When is the spirit created? And biblically, where can we go to get that answer? So hang on to that. Stick it in your back pocket. Sometimes these are very hard questions to answer. They're not as straightforward as you may think. Even the history of abortion among Baptists is very interesting. If you go back to the 60s and what Baptists would have said, probably, I'm guessing, I don't know that, but we would probably all say, well, an abortion out of, it's just inconvenient for me to have a child right now. We'd probably all, or most of us would say, well, that would be wrong. Well, what about in the case of rape and incest? What about the case of when it endangers the life of the mother? And it's a very narrow margin. I mean, the vast majority, well into 90%, is an unspecified reason, as opposed to those others. So, we'll get there. But I hope you can see how this, especially in the abortion conversation going on in our country right now, how this is a very relevant topic. Okay, so we're talking about something tonight called monism. And what we're actually talking about is what was on that opening slide. What exactly, when God created man, and we're using that to include man and woman. Sorry, ladies, I don't know why. It's all lumped under man. What did God... Thank you.
Yeah, don't mansplain it.
I don't have to worry about this audience too much. What exactly did God create? What exactly did God create when He created man? Okay? So, when you ask that question, this is what we'll talk about. These are the different views. The constitution of man. What constitutes a person being human? There's some different views. One's called monism. That's one we'll look at tonight. Next time we'll talk about dualism. Then we'll talk about the creation of the soul. When and how was the soul created? Do people create souls? Through the creation of a child. And then the image of God in man. What does it mean that we are image bearers of God? So, questions. And these are really important, especially when you start talking about the life of when you've lost someone you love. Are the questions about, well, what does it mean to be human? When you die, what happens to you? How many of you remember the very first funeral that you went to? How many of you were fairly young? I mean, I think I was born later in life, and for my parents, I was born at 10 years
He's
old.
always had that beard.
Yeah, always had. Always been missing the hair. A little older today. Came along later in my parents' life, so all of my their aunts and uncles were all older, and my grandparents were older. So I started going to funerals. I think I went to my first one when I was 6. I went to several before I was the age of 10. And I remember the very first one I went to, I just remember, and everybody would file past the body to pay respects, and I'm just staring. It was Uncle Bus. He was a bus driver, and they called him Uncle Bus. And I just looked and looked. I don't know what I was looking for, but I was curious. Like when somebody dies, do you see something come up out of the body? Could you be there right at the moment? And they've got if you go on YouTube, there's little videos where they say they've captured the spirit leaving the body and stuff like that. But when you start thinking about, well, what happens, when someone dies or when someone you love dies, our minds, I think, start to wander. For example, is there such thing as a soul? Is there any distinction between the soul and the spirit? What's the relationship between the body and the soul? So just imagine for a moment. Imagine your soul. Okay, just imagine your soul. Does it look a lot like you? Does it just kind of look, do you just sort of picture yourself maybe a little clear or transparent or something, or kind of blurry lines, maybe clouds around your feet or something? What do you picture? What do you imagine when you picture your own soul? You never had? Don't think about it. Picture yourself. Are you recognizable? Do you ever think about, so when you die, and we're going to look at different views, and you know, that immaterial part of us, the soul or spirit, goes to be with the Lord. What is that being like? Do they have your personality? Or is personality something that you lose? Or personality is something that's part of the fall or the evil part of you? Does it just change? Like the bad parts of it fall off? Yes?
What I've been thinking about, just in that kind of mad sense, is what happens to your memory? You've lived a life of a lot of activity.
Yeah.
Slips. Yeah.
Do you keep your memories?
Won't we recognize family and spouses in heaven? I think we will.
How?
Our spirit.
Okay, but so you're assuming we all kind of look
We're
alike.
gonna get a new body, but we don't know if it's gonna look like that.
But in that intermediate period, right? So we've got the death, right? Absent from the body, present with the Lord. Maybe we'll talk about if that's actually what happens. Then we'll talk about. Then there's a resurrection down the road somewhere, right? Whenever Christ comes back, but in that period of time, you know, what are we going to look like?
I don't know. We will have an appearance.
Then how are we going to recognize people?
Yeah.
What about people who've had death experiences?
Ask a lot of questions.
People with near-death experiences.
Yeah. Or they might have died in,
It's an awareness.
like
Yeah.
my son-in-law died.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law died. He was electrocuted. He was dead for 4 minutes, and then he came back.
Yeah.
He saw the Lord in that time.
Wow.
How
Okay.
do you know it's not just their mind playing tricks?
I don't know.
Right.
Near-death experiences absolutely fascinate me. I don't. It's not like you're reading the pages of scripture or anything. Let's just right. But I mean, it's fascinating to hear about people, hear their stories. They made movies, I think, about at least one.
That little boy.
Yeah.
They're not very scriptural.
No, not
What
very
about,
scriptural.
the guy who was dead and said to the, go tell my brother about hell so that he won't.
Yeah, the rich man.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the rich
So
man died.
he
And,
recognized who he was.
yep. Or what about? Yes,
So you're
Brian.
making the assumption that we're going to be seeing with the same type of eyes we have now,
Oh, I'm getting chills.
right? And so we're not.
Oh, I'm getting
If we're not
chills.
going to have these eyes, then we're going to perceive things differently.
Oh, you're asking some good questions now, man. Yeah, because now you're bringing in actually the topic of monism. What does it mean to be divorced from a physical body, and what can I still do? I mean, what you're getting at is the reason this particular view exists, because we can pack up and go home now.
Okay.
Because literally people are wondering, well, wait a second, what does it mean to be a soul separated from a body? If it's by my body, I can do so many things. Oh, that's good.
Body
You
daily
can
liberty.
just do physical things. You can't do spiritual things.
Can't do spirit. You can do. Say that again, Pig.
You can just do physical things in your physical body,
Yeah.
because you're in a physical realm.
Right.
But then when you go to a whole nother dimension or realm,
Uh-huh.
you don't need the physical body anymore, because it's not a physical realm.
The body
It's a
is very
spiritual realm.
limiting.
But you know, Jesus he's got a body. He's going to be riding on a horse. He's got his name written on his thigh. He's got his scars on his hands.
This is good.
But then you can walk through walls and appear in another room.
Are the wheels turning a little bit?
There's more than one force there.
Well, even spiritual activity, right? Was prayer a spiritual activity? And I do that with a physical body. At some point in the future, I'll get a physical body back, right? And then I'll continue. Will that be a spiritual realm when God makes a new heaven and new earth? Okay, let's keep going. This
What
is
do you mean
good.
that You're going to get a physical body back.
When we're resurrected.
Well, you'll get a body, but how do you know it's physical?
Well, what other kind of body is there?
Don't know.
See, you don't know.
Okay, let's keep rolling. So some examples. So do your physical genetic characteristics that contributed to your personality, will that carry on into heaven? Or in your immaterial self? You know, if you keep looking the way you look, that means your DNA, there's something really important about it. There's something really special about it. And again, the question is, well, what makes you you? How does the soul relate to the body? And again, do you lose personality when you become immaterial? And are you the same person? Let me ask you this: if I cut off my finger, am I less of a person?
Your hand is
Volumetrically.
Okay. Who am I? If I'm not physical, who am I?
personality. Your soul.
So you're equating soul and personality.
No, I'm just saying your personality, your soul, those are different things that make you who you are.
Okay.
I don't know if personality is part of the soul. I just know that you have a personality.
So if I lose my finger and I'm no less a person, when I'm resurrected, would I expect to have that finger?
Because you'll be perfect.
Why?
You'll be
We're gonna have
perfect.
perfect bodies.
So perfection is having all my fingers.
Your body,
Because
whatever
Adam was
this body
created
will
with
be, it will be
10
perfect.
fingers, 10 toes.
There won't be any polydactyly up in heaven.
There'll be what?
There won't be any polydactyly. Multiple
Multiple
like fingers or
digits.
toes. Yeah.
Okay.
And if you didn't have your personality, wouldn't that be like God just again creating robots?
If I didn't have my personality?
Yeah.
So you would equate volition and will with personality. If I have will, then I have personality. If I can make choices, we can all make choices, right?
Right.
But we all have different, do we all have the same personality?
That's why we all make different choices.
Good.
Try to be so close. Can I give an example?
that one good.
I can't remember the guy. He was a mass murderer who killed all kinds of girls in colleges. Ted Bundy.
Yeah.
And then Dr. James Dobson met with him before he was put through the death chamber.
Yeah.
And he turned his life over to the Lord. So he was a psychopath, and psychopaths cannot change and get themselves out of whatever his mindset is. But if he turned his life over to the Lord, that part of him will not be there anymore. Because you can't be a psychopath.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
So you still have your personality, but the evil parts of you will not be there.
Okay.
Because there will be no sin.
Okay. Let's keep going. Yes, Rachel.
So is the vocabulary in the Bible the same as we know it? So like he talks about the body of Christ as in like the church, not like a person's body. So when he says you'll get a new body, does that mean as we know that word
Yeah.
that means, or is
So that
it
would be
something
this slide right here.
different?
Ooh. Great
Segue.
question. You two are asking all the right questions. That's right, I planted
How many
it.
did you pick?
That's right. We're,
But so let's keep going. Let's ask, what is our essential nature? Because the church, interestingly, I would say in our modern age, we tend to downplay the physical. We tend to think the physical is bad. And I don't believe God intended that. I think God loves kidneys, and God loves spleens, and God loves intestines. And he made these things, and he said it was good. So we often, though, I believe, we don't like that necessarily. We tend to upplay the spiritual and downplay the physical, as if the physical is bad and the spiritual is good. So let's move on. Let's talk about what is our essential nature. And here's the question that Rachel was asking. Words that the Bible uses with reference to the constitution of man. You've got several here. So you've got this word soma that means body. Suke, that's where we get the word psychology. Translated soul, spirit, pneuma. The mind is called the nous or the dianoia. The heart's where we get cardiologist, the cardia. Sarx is flesh. And then, this is such a good word for your guts, splachnon. Yeah, but it's not just physical. Sometimes the Bible uses this word, talk about like This is where you feel stuff, like, just like if in your guts, somebody said, well, that was a real kick to the guts. You know what they're talking about. Something happened, just does not feel right. So, these are all words the Bible uses to describe us, like our makeup, what makes people people. So, when you start talking about what makes a person, there's these like two alternatives you have. One is called physicalism and one is called dualism. Okay? So those are our two alternatives. You can break them down this way. Physicalism can be broken down into one's called naturalism, and this is just a non-Christian view of who a person is. It's just a physical body. It came from somewhere. It evolved from something. We don't, you don't exactly know where, but it's just a naturalistic. This would be like an atheist view of a person. Only physical, not spiritual. And then this monism view, which is there is no immaterial part of a person, and we'll define it here in a minute. It's mainly like everything is so connected you can't break it apart. And then with dualism, you've got these other two views we'll talk about next time. One's called the trichotomy view and the dichotomy view. It depends on what you do with the soul and the spirit. So the trichotomous view is if you believe there's a difference between the soul and the spirit. The dichotomous view would be if they're the same thing. Okay? We'll touch on those more next time. So, these are views that are held by Christians, okay? Monism, dualism, and trichotomy, and dichotomy. And again, naturalism isn't included in this because it's an atheistic viewpoint that man just came from the marshes and the ether, and we don't know how the marshes and the ether got there. There was a Big Bang, but we don't know how the Big Bang started or why it started or why it happened. So, is our body the same as our soul? Well, let me ask you, do you think the body is the same as the soul?
No.
Okay. I'm guessing most of us, we probably wouldn't be here if we had that view. It's certainly not historically a Baptist perspective on what makes a person a person. We'll return to this question later, but so the definition of monism, it means one or alone, the monos, the teaching that spirit, soul, and body are all essentially the same, or that the spirit and soul do not exist without the body. And this often goes by the name soul sleep. You ever heard of that phrase, soul sleep? Yeah. Because that's really a position necessitated by monism. In other words, if there is no immaterial part of you that separates from you when you die, if it's all just one thing, then you have got to answer the hard question. So when somebody dies, like where are they? And that's where this term, it's like the person just sleeps until Christ returns, and then they'll be resurrected. So who holds this view? With Jehovah's Witnesses, Christian Scientists, and I'll be honest, some of these I'm not terribly familiar with at all. Christadelphians, J.E.T. Robertson, and he actually wrote a book. It's like a 2-volume set of Greek vocabulary. So if you've studied Greek, you may be familiar with him. If not, you probably haven't heard of him. And then Neo-Orthodoxy, that's the Karl Barth. If you've heard of Karl Barth, he was a famous proponent of Neo-Orthodoxy. So there's these two different branches of monism. Some would just say there is no soul, and some would say that, the soul sleeps while the body is dead until Christ comes back. And King Henry VI held this view: the souls that do depart, hence do sleep, being without all sense, feeling, and perceiving until the day of judgment, do utterly descent from the right that is closed to us in Holy Scriptures. I think that might be descent. But King Henry is taking the position, wait a second, there's so many things that you can't see or touch or eat or feel if you don't have a body. Therefore, it makes no sense that there be any kind of, and I'm going to call it consciousness, if your body's dead, if your body's gone, it's just almost like, what's the point? You know? And this is what I think, this is what you were touching on, Brian, too. So, why would people believe this? So this is, we'll look at these three views, but you notice that there's only the body. And the body does not separate from itself anything in this view when someone dies. It's just, it stays all together, and then it is dealt with here on earth, awaiting resurrection. So everything is held together at death. So far, so good?
Okay, no, that's not so good. What about like when someone gives their body up to the doctors to use for research? Or you're cremated?
Yeah. Yeah, you're still like, you'd still be awaiting. It's really no different. I mean,
Because you're gonna rot it.
yeah, you're gonna rot. I mean, the body, you may not be ashes right at the get-go, but you're gonna turn into something not far from that after
Right.
decay and everything. So, same way with like if you donate your body to science and they use it for research. And, yeah. I'm sure that if I donated my body to science, they'd say, well, how does somebody live this long and took such poor care of themselves? That's what they'd be.
I mean, it doesn't make sense to me how they can say there is, the body has everything, because the body will deteriorate, the soul and spirit won't.
Now, it's, I've had a lot of people ask me, is cremation okay? Like, I've had that question a lot. It's worth asking. For a lot of years, the church taught it was not okay. If you go to a lot of that's based on the Old Testament. If you were cremated, among the Jews, if you were cremated, it was for no good reason. They burnt the body, and the purpose of burning the body right then, they thought it would prevent resurrection. That's why the Catholic Church dug up, was it Wycliffe or Tyndale? One of those two guys. They'd already died, they dug them up, and then they burnt the body. Because they had translated the Bible into English. They didn't want the Bible in English.
Oh my goodness.
So they dug them up, burned them, to prevent them from being resurrected. Now, this is another interesting point. So
So they believe in monism.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not going to go that far yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Let's hold that question. But I got way back here. Come on, where are we? Here. So in Bhutan, Christianity just came to the country of Bhutan like 20 years ago. It's primarily been Buddhist. And when a Buddhist dies, they're cremated. Well, one of the first things that the Bhutanese Christians wanted to do, and as a matter of fact, they started asking for money. One of the first things they wanted to make was a cemetery, because they did not want the bodies of Christians to be cremated. As a matter of fact, do you know when they bury someone, do you know how the body is oriented in the grave? Just about. I almost drove through Sheridan Cemetery to take pictures. How are they buried? Yeah, you got the feet towards the east. You've got the head to the west. Why is that?
So when they come up, they're
When they pop up, they're facing, Christ will come out of the east. They'll pop up, they'll be facing east.
Honestly?
Yeah, yeah. And where are people primarily buried? What's that? On a hill. If it's possible, they'll put a cemetery on a hill. Why is that?
Pop up faster.
You're just like closer to the kingdom. I mean, so there is this mentality that we've had. It's like, it's been important how we bury, when we bury, where we bury, because there is a sense in which the church has held a position the body's important. We're going to regain a physical body. So even in that symbology, it's a communication that, hey, the body's important. God, the body's going to be resurrected. The body's important to God. Okay, let's keep rolling. So let's make a defense. So in this class, this is what we do. So people hold this view. It's not for no reason. There's actually some biblical arguments that we'll go through, and we'll look at those biblical arguments for monism, and then we'll go and we'll refute those arguments. We'll talk about a response to those scriptural arguments. Okay, so, defense of monism. One, when the Bible speaks of death, it speaks in terms of sleeping. Okay? So look at 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 15. This is Paul talking to this church in Thessalonica. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep, so that you will not grieve as do the rest who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will not precede those who have fallen asleep. Now, what is this? Why are they having this conversation?
Because he's just told them about the rapture.
Okay, he's talking about the rapture, but why is he in particularly writing this to the church? You know what the problem was in Thessalonica? Do you understand what their question was? What they're disturbed by? Here's a group of people that they're being left out. Kinda. Here's a group of people that's very concerned. They were like quitting their jobs because they thought the second coming of Christ was so imminent that there was no need to keep working. It's like, well, Christ is coming. I don't like this job anyway. I'm out of here. So they had that mentality, but then what happened? Christ didn't come, and then what happened? People started dying. Whoa, wait a second here. Now, what kind of sense do I make out of this? So if you were presented with that question, like if you could go back and the Thessalonians were concerned, how would you comfort them? What would you say to them? Like, they just lost a loved one. I say this in funerals all the time. Well, how would you comfort that family?
You're going to be with them in eternity.
Okay, they'll be with them in eternity. Where would you say they were at that very moment? Don't worry, they're what? They're with the Lord. You don't have to worry about that. But is that what Paul says? No, that's not what Paul says. That's not how he's comforting these people. He's not saying, don't worry, their souls are in heaven. He said their body's here, but and this is where the view comes from. This monistic view. This is, well, they're just there. People are asleep in the grave. They're just waiting. They're in a holding pattern. And Paul's going to say the body's going to be reawakened from the soul sleep. Okay? So let's keep going. Some of you may be turning into monistics, Maybe not. Number 2, those in the Old Testament showed no sign of belief in an intermediate state. They simply spoke of going to the place where all the dead go, the grave, which was called Sheol. Their hope was only in the resurrection. Okay? So you can look at some verses here. Job 17:13-16. If I look for Sheol is my home, I make my bed in the darkness. If I call to the pit, you are my father, to the worm, my mother and my sister. Where now is my hope? And who regards my hope? Will it go down with me to Sheol? Shall we together go down into the dust? I mean, it sounds pretty hopeless, doesn't it? Okay. Genesis 50:25. This is kind of a weird one. This is a real. So Genesis 50:25. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones up from here. So, what's going on with this? Abraham, take my body, take my bones to the promised land. Moses, he didn't make it to the promised land. Why was it so important? Why did he say, swear to me that Israel, sons of Israel, carry my bones up from here? It was very important to them that they were placed in the promised land. They wanted to be resurrected in the promised land. Maybe they just didn't want to have to walk there if it was far away. But they wanted to be buried in the promised land so they would be resurrected in the promised land. They weren't thinking of some intermediate state between death and resurrection. So take me to the promise. And this was a statement of faith. He believed he would be resurrected. Joseph believed that. He trusted God, and he trusted he would be resurrected. And would be resurrected in the promised land. But again, there's no mention of any state between death and resurrection. Number 3, many biblical writers explicitly say that there is no intermediate state. Nothing between death and resurrection. Psalm 6:5. For there is no mention of you in death and Sheol. Who will give you thanks? Okay, this is David talking. Psalm 39. What profit is there in my blood if I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you? This sounds like Job. Will it declare your faithfulness? Psalm 88, 3-5. For my soul has had enough troubles, and my life has drawn near to Sheol. Remember, Sheol is just, it's like sometimes it's called like Hades or the underworld. It's just, all they knew was if you put somebody in the ground, they would start disappearing. And you just like exist there. I'm reckoned among those who go down to the pit. I have become like a man without strength, forsaken among the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, who remember no more, and they are cut off from your hand. What else? Isaiah 38:18. For Sheol cannot thank you, death cannot praise you. Those who go down to the pit cannot hope for your faithfulness. Ecclesiastes 9:5 and 10. For the living know they will die, but the dead do not know anything, nor have they any longer a reward, for their memory is forgotten. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for there is no activity or planning or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol where you are going. So these aren't exactly funeral passages. Not verses I would read during a very nice memorial for someone. These people are not having a good day. The writer of Ecclesiastes is not having a good day. So they don't see an intermediate period. They don't see a time between death and resurrection where you are consciously enjoying the presence of God. Okay? Number 4. This is kind of long. This one's a little more abstract. But so the idea of an intermediate state is of Greek origin. So remember, you've got through the Old Testament, Israel goes through different states of being conquered and then getting returned to the land. The northern kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians. The southern kingdom was conquered by the Babylonians. The Persians are going to come in. They're going to wipe out the Babylonians. They're going to send the Israelites back to their homeland. And then there's going to be a long period where like empires come and go. You're going to have the Medes. You're going to have, and eventually the Greeks are going to come in, and they're going to Hellenize the entire Mediterranean area. That's why the New Testament was inspired in Greek, because they spoke Greek around that area of the Mediterranean, because that's what Alexander the Great had conquered all that. And then the Romans are going to rise up, and they're going to conquer the Greeks. So they're in power by the time you get to the New Testament. But that Greek philosophy is still around big time. You know, your Plato's, your Socrates, all those guys, Dionysius. It was very much in play. So the Hebrews believed in a holistic self in which the hope was in the resurrection. The Greeks downplayed the role of the body material self, believing that death was a release from this confinement. By the way, that philosophy has very much stuck with us today. Yeah. Very much so. I know Peggy and I, we've talked about our favorite song, haven't we, Peggy? I'll Fly Away. We sing about it, right?
Right.
Some glad morning, when this life is over, what? Man, we'll fly away. Which is great, don't get me wrong. It's a good song. I sing the song.
Well, it says we will meet the Lord in the air. That's fine if it's nothing else.
You know, I love it. I like that song. It's fun. We've got a great video we show now when we play that song.
But it's also biblical. It's right out of Scripture.
And so it is. It is. So the only emphasis, this is not about right and wrong, it's about emphasis. What do you emphasize? What do you de-emphasize? I would put more emphasis of our hope being in the resurrection as opposed to the separation of body and soul. That's actually, again, that's a very Greek thought, that we want to shed this old skin suit just so we can get to the real living, you know? And I kind of get it, you know, the aches and pains, they increase. Disease, I mean, there is something to be, we rejoice in that we're going to get a new body. But it's when we get a new body. But it's still better to be with the Lord than here, right?
Amen.
Yeah. Sorry, that's a side note. Those who see a plurality in the constitution of human nature read the Bible through Hellenistic or Greek eyes. Hellenism refers to Greek. Anybody know why? Why they call it Hellenism? Helen of Troy, yeah. That's why it's called Hellenism. Failing to see that when the Bible speaks of the body, soul, and spirit, it is the same as when it speaks of the mind, heart, and soul. They are all the same. Body, soul, and spirit, it is the same as when it speaks of the mind, heart, and soul. They're all the same. So the Greeks honestly emphasize the spiritual kind of the way we do over the physical. And then number 5, modern science has demonstrated there is a one-to-one correspondence between the neurological activity of the brain and the feelings, memories. This is what don't tell me your name. This is what the gentleman in the red shirt said earlier. Wayne. I'm so sorry, Wayne.
That happens to me too with a lot of people.
Thank you, very gracious. Yes. This makes the existence of the soul spirit not only necessary but untenable. Once the brain ceases activity, the person ceases to exist. So, I mean, you've probably heard now, like if you get a certain injury to a certain part of the brain, certain memories are going to go. So there's this connection between your brain and what you remember. There's a neurochemical reality there. So then, the question, well, what is the soul? Well, they may say, well, it's your memories. And, the spirit is the part of you that relates. So the track, if you believe there's body, soul, spirit, the spirit relates to God, the soul to your memories, your personality. Your body is purely the material part of you. But if you can damage your brain and lose memories, then there's this connection that can't be separated. It's just like, if you have your thyroid removed, if you don't take something to replace what your thyroid was giving you, eventually you'll become suicidal. You'll get very depressed, and it takes an emotional effect. So there's a strong connection between how you feel and what your body's doing, how you're doing emotionally with the physical body. Okay. The evidence that we have indicates that our mental life is dependent on certain bodily processes, particularly those associated with the brain. We know, for example, that damage to various parts of the brain results in the cessation of certain kinds of conscious states, memories, thought processes, and the like. It seems eminently reasonable to infer from this that consciousness is dependent for its existence on the existence and proper function of the human brain. When at death the brain ceases to function, the reasonable inference is that our mental life ceases as well. So this is from a philosophical book by William Rowe. All right, so that's the defense of monism. If I can.
So if somebody's brain dead, they're not dead. They're still breathing for them with a machine, but they do the brain waves and unplug them then. Has their soul left their body?
Yeah. Do frozen embryos have souls? Now our little guy, for those of you who don't know, we had our son through embryo adoption. So he was actually frozen 10 years. So how old is he really? Let's keep going. Okay, so this then would be the response to monism. So there is this biblical defense. It's based on a biblical defense. So how would you respond to Modernism? I would say, so number one, the idea, well, to the church in Thessalonica, these people are just asleep. Okay, well, sleep is a metaphor that is often used for death. This does not mean that the whole person is asleep, just the body. Okay, this is what Paul wrote. So it's a metaphor. It's not. He's not saying that you're really asleep. It's just a way of saying this person has died. There's lots of metaphors in Scripture. That's not enough of a reason to say that this is not necessarily an anthropological assertion about the state of the soul. Number two. So number two was. Good here. So number two was those in the Old Testament showed no sign of belief in an intermediate state. You went down to Sheol. That's what they would say. So, monism is a misunderstanding in the nature of progressive revelation. What is progressive revelation? For those of you who had previous Theology Thursday classes, what is progressive revelation? So you heard the story about the farmer in Kansas. Actually, it was a new pastor, a young new pastor from seminary, just out of seminary, went to Kansas, and he had his first church. And there was an old farmer that showed up. It was a bad snowy day. Nobody came except for one person in this church. And so the young seminary graduate pastor sees there's just one person sitting out there in the auditorium. But he said, you know what, I prepared this sermon, I'm going to preach the whole thing anyway. So he preaches the whole sermon to this one man out there, this lone rancher. And then after the service, what is he? Well, he goes to the back to, like he normally would, to greet people as they leave. And the farmer, the rancher, he stopped and said, Pastor, that was a great sermon you had today. He said, well, thank you. Put a lot of work into that. He said, but when I've only got one cow out in the field, I don't drop off all my hay bales. So, progressive revelation, God did not drop off all his hay bales right in the very beginning. He continues to drop off hay bales as the Scriptures move along and time moves along. So they didn't know everything in the Old Testament. Not everything was revealed in the Old Testament that was revealed in the New Testament. Old Testament saints did not have as much revelation as we do. Therefore, while it is true that they had very little knowledge of an intermediate state, this does not rule out the possibility of its existence any more than having no knowledge of the new heaven and new earth rules out the possibility of their future existence. They didn't have the book of Revelation. We have the book of Revelation. We know that there's this new heaven and new earth that God's going to make. And just because they didn't know that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. They didn't have all the hay bales.
But that brings up the question, are all those Old Testament people going to be in heaven? Are they saved?
Are all the Old Testament, so maybe, let me see if I understand your question. Are they saved the same way in the Old Testament as they are in the New Testament?
Probably not.
So we'll cover that in soteriology. That would be next, that would be in the spring. It's an excellent question. How are people saved in the Old Testament? Yes?
It's, from what I remember, it's kind of a different standard, because Old Testament, saved by sacrifice, New Testament, saved by Jesus, right?
Yeah. I would only add to that I think you're saved, the saints from the Old Testament are saved much the same way as people in the New Testament. It's trust in God, faith in Yahweh. And, Christ hadn't died yet, but they were still saved on credit that would come from Christ's sacrifice, even though he hadn't died yet.
I like that.
Yeah. Still by faith. And you didn't get into heaven just by virtue of being a Jew.
Hebrews 11 has that. By faith.
Yeah, by faith. You got the whole Hall of Fame of believers in Hebrews 11. Yeah. And so there's still a requirement of faith. That's important. Even sacrifices can be made, but still made in faith.
Right.
There's a true Israel within Israel. So you weren't saved just by your genetic heritage. Okay. Comments or questions? Okay, let's keep going. 4. So this was the idea of the Greek influence on the New Testament Christians. While it may be true that our ideas of the intermediate state could have Greek influence, it is not true that this makes it wrong. This is committing the genetic fallacy of ascribing falsehood to an idea because of its source. You know, saying our parents are our genetic source, where it came, just because it came from a certain place doesn't mean it's wrong. Besides this, the New Testament is the primary source of this view, not Greek philosophy. That's the key right there. It's not based on what the Greek philosophers were saying. It's based on what the New Testament was telling us. So, the New the Greeks had their own concept of God. Do we adopt the Greek concept of God? No, they had a whole pantheon of gods. So they also had a morality. Does that mean we get all our morality from the Greeks? No. Okay. So they had a philosophy based on logic and reason. Now Romans 1, interesting, will say that you can reason that there is a God. How does Romans 1 teach that you can reason there's a God?
By creation.
By creation, right? Yeah, why is there something instead of nothing? Number 5, while it is true that the brain is intricately, so this is the idea of the brain, and without a brain you can't have, it's kind of who you are. While it is true that the brain is intricately linked to all aspects of a whole person, this does not prove that it is the whole person. The body is part of what a person is, but this does not necessarily mean that it is all that a person is. Okay? Now,
Did we do 3?
did we do 3?
Yes.
Yes. This was my hay bale story. You probably got lost in the story of the hay bales.
Was it?
No, it wasn't.
No.
Number 2 was hay bales.
We didn't do 3.
Did we skip 3?
We did.
We did
Yes.
skip 3.
Oh, we did. I'm sorry. Thank you. Well, I'm glad somebody's paying attention. So, number 3, so this would be all the Bible verses we went through about there being their knowledge of all the real depressing verses we went through. While knowledge of the intermediate state was obscure in the Old Testament, these biblical writers do not say that there is no intermediate state. Their message is about what people cannot do in the intermediate state. The basic message is that after we die, we cannot proclaim knowledge, wisdom, and praise to others on earth about what the Lord has done. So they're just proclaiming, well, this is what a dead body can't do. Dead body can't talk, can't praise God, can't pass along wisdom. So if you look at those passages, that's the argument they're making. Well, Lord, if I'm dead, this is what I cannot do for you. That's the basic principle anyway. Are we good? Did I miss anything else?
The window.
I have what's that?
You said the window.
Yes, okay, so we have an illustration here about this brain being all you are. So imagine for a moment that this is a way to illustrate this brain, this idea the brain is who we are. Imagine a person sitting in a room by themselves, and there's a wall in front of them. This room only has one window. And anything they can see outside that room, they have to see it through the window. Okay? Now, this is in essence how you could think of the brain. If you believe that a person is not their brain, then you could think of the person. The person illustrates the soul. The brain illustrates the window. And this kind of goes back to the psychopath comment, right? So if that brain affects how you see and perceive everything. But that does not mean that you are your brain. That would be the difference between the two. I think I've not read, I know have you ever read J.P. Moreland? Are you familiar with J.P. Moreland? He's a Christian philosopher. I've heard that his stuff is gold. If you want to really dive into that, I think he's written more pages and more than you may want to know on the subject of the difference between the soul and the brain. But that's an illustration of how that could work. In other words, the brain is the means through which we perceive this physical world, right? Because everything comes back to the brain, all of our senses. So how then can we be separated from the body and still see, and there's hard verses. If you look at the Transfiguration, who was in the cloud? It was Abraham was one of them. Yeah. So they could see, the disciples that were with Jesus could see there where he was not alone in the cloud. Well, Abraham was not resurrected at this point. But he looked like a person, at least when he appeared with Jesus in this weird, ethereal moment. He looked like a person. And what's that?
Wasn't it Moses and Elijah?
I think you're right. I think it's seminary, No, I think you're right. I think it was Moses and Elijah.
I mean,
I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
They
Whoops.
were recognized.
Yeah. Thank you. See, you gotta keep an eye on things. So, in other words, it appears, at least in that moment, I mean, you've got non-physical beings who are looking human, at least human enough to be, and somehow they knew this was Moses and Elijah. Yeah. I don't think they're wearing name tags. Maybe Jesus told them later. Yeah. So, that our chemical makeup, our brain, will affect how we perceive reality. But that doesn't mean it's who we are. As a matter of fact, have you ever read the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis?
yeah.
The third one is called That Hideous Strength, I think. And he talks in that third book about how he thinks eventually they'll attempt to just reduce man to nothing but a bunch of chemical reactions. Like, that's all you are. You are your chemical makeup. And he's making the point that we're much more than that. So any comments or questions about monism? About who appeared in the cloud with Christ? Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. So next time we'll talk about the dichotomy and the trichotomy views, which I think you'll probably resonate with a little more. This isn't the view that I would certainly hold. I don't think this jives with the New Testament, regardless of what King Henry VI may say. And you'll probably find yourself either in the dichotomy view or the trichotomy. It depends on what you do with the soul and the spirit. What are the differences between those two, and why does the Bible break those two apart? So, and is there any consequence to either joining them together or taking them apart? So, are we good? Okay. Let me close this with a word of prayer.